UK facing a constitutional crisis as Scotland's Supreme Court is hearing arguments about whether Holyrood can hold an independence referendum, even if the UK government continues to object to it. It comes as a new poll found that the majority of voters in Scotland and Northern Ireland want referendums on the breakup of Britain. Scotland, 50% think there should be a referendum in the next 5 years. 49% say they would vote for independence. Northern Ireland, 51% of people surveyed want a referendum about the border within the next 5 years. 47% say they'd vote to stay in the Union, compared to 42% who want to see a united Ireland. Support for Welsh independence has grown 23%, up from the teens 5 years ago. Former Prime Minister Gordon Brown says the UK is at risk of becoming a failed state and breaking up unless there are deep reforms.
And I think the Conservatives have got to recognise that unless the United Kingdom now fundamentally changes, and I mean from top to bottom, recognising the importance of the regions and the nations, I think the United Kingdom could end.
Gordon Brown. Let's speak with Lord Peter Hain, former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, also former Secretary of State for Wales too. Peter Hain, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Has anybody else held those two portfolios before?
Not until I did. In fact, nobody had ever shared the Secretary of State for Wales job with any other job. I was also Leader of the Commons and Work and Pensions. And nobody has since, but make that what you will.
You didn't tick the Scotland box, though, on that heady journey through New Labour, Peter.
Indeed.
I mean, when you were, certainly let's take Northern Ireland, which was an area you know incredibly well, the terrain politically, culturally and otherwise. When you were Secretary of State, when, I'm thinking of the Good Friday Agreement prior to that, when all that was going on as well, that whole period, did you sense that the inevitable journey of Northern Ireland is to return to being part of a united Ireland?
No, I don't think there was ever anything inevitable about it, and nor is there now. I mean, I was Secretary of State who negotiated the deal under Tony Blair that brought Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness in to share power together, the bitter old enemies who became the Chuckle brothers.
Became mates, didn't they? Which is interesting.
They did, yes. It was an extraordinary thing and something I'm most proud of in my 50-year political career. But no, I don't think it is inevitable, even with these latest polling figures. But there's no question that the momentum is with those who wish for a united Ireland. The nationalist Catholic share of the population, which is roughly half, has always been in favour of that. But there is certainly some evidence that, as it were, soft unionists, particularly those in the business community who have found themselves trading across the Irish border, now find themselves in a situation where actually Northern Ireland remains within the European single market and the customs union uniquely within the UK, that I think inevitably eyes will switch south rather than across the Irish Sea, although Great Britain remains both a critically important trading partner with Northern Ireland, and of course there's the long-standing historical ties and identity ties, as well as, of course, the strong feelings of the Protestant Unionist community.
Indeed. I would imagine if one is campaigning for a united Ireland, then what's just happened with Brexit falls straight into your lap, really, doesn't it? I mean, this would be huge news.
Yes, I said at the time of the referendum that whatever the rights and wrongs of it for the UK, it was Northern Ireland was the Achilles heel of a hard Brexit. And it's proved that. Even Boris Johnson, who didn't favour any kind of remaining membership of the common market and the single market and the customs union, has had to concede that for Northern Ireland because the Irish border would otherwise have become absolutely toxic, and we could have seen a resumption of all the previous bad years of trouble around it and the implications for stability and for peace. So it was inevitable, and given the international alignment, incoming President Joe Biden's commitment to having an open border, the European Union's absolute firmness on that, quite rightly so in my view, you then ended up with the very hardline unionists who voted for Brexit, and Northern Ireland voted against Brexit, against leaving the European Union, along with Scotland. Those hardline unionists have actually weakened the very union that they strongly believe in. And I did point this out to my friends in the DUP and others that I know from my Secretary of State days and keep in touch with, that this was likely to be the outcome. So they have, in a way, and so have the hardline Brexiteers. When I say hardline Brexiteers, they won the referendum. There's no argument about that. But they could have chosen a closer relationship with the European Union than we've ended up, and they could have avoided the effective border on the Irish Sea between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom, and they could have actually lowered the temperature right across the UK in respect of Scotland as well, but they didn't do that. And so in many respects, they're the architects of the UK's current misfortune, and I agree with Gordon Brown, not just because he was my boss at one stage as Prime Minister and I worked with him in the Cabinet, but because he's been on about this for quite a while, that the UK is in danger. And unless there is greater respect for the constituent nations, and also, I think, for the regions of England, because England is the most centralised part of the UK, leaving out London, which has its own powerful elected mayor and assembly, with significant devolution in London. But that's not the case for Yorkshire or the North East or Cornwall or any other part of England. And I think the whole of the UK is in great peril at the present time because of this confluence of forces, including Brexit and including the fact that the Scottish nationalists have been riding high. I think that requires new thinking and a new common approach. And Gordon Brown's called for a national convention, as is the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, because I do think if we want the UK to stay together, and it's got a history of power in the world, but we're diminished if we break apart.
Sure.
Then we've got to work very hard at it, and I think this can only be done by showing respect for not just the constituent nations like Scotland and Wales, but for Northern Ireland as well, and of course for parts of England that don't really have the same powerful voice that, for example, Wales, where I'm speaking from in my former constituency of Neath, does, as does Scotland and as does Northern Ireland.
It's interesting that Mr. Johnson came in on a ticket of evening up areas around the UK. I mean, there was a lot made of that, wasn't there, at the time? And, you know, the fact that the Tories did well in seats previously occupied by your own party, Peter Hain, and yet this narrative is not going away, despite the mood music that was around Mr. Johnson when he was vying for the big job at number 10.
Yes, and that's his own responsibility, and I don't make this as a Yahoo party point on this point. He, particularly the handling of the COVID pandemic crisis, has shown great insensitivity and almost arrogance, that he knows best, that the Health Secretary for England, Matt Hancock, knows best. And when you get somebody who is in favour of the UK, like the Welsh Government First Minister Mark Drakeford, he's a unionist, if you want to use these terms in UK terms, feeling really angry, feeling he couldn't even get Boris Johnson to answer his phone calls or engage in any proper consultation. That has exacerbated the situation as well, as you've found that although this is a global pandemic and certainly a UK-wide pandemic, there has not been the degree of respect and coordination and common approach which it would have been sensible to have, and which, for example, Cardiff under Mark Drakeford, and for that matter, though there are always other agendas of separatism running around for Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland under her as well, along with Northern Ireland, would have wanted and would have made sense. And it's not just, as it were, a Scots, Welsh, Northern Irish problem. You saw the mayors, for example, in Manchester and elsewhere feeling really angry that they were not being listened to. So I think this is all contributing to a real sense that if we want the UK to hold together, and I do, I think it makes sense for all of us. I think it would make sense for Scotland too, because, you know, this is a world of China and India, the big emerging superpowers of this century, of America, of Russia, of a very dangerous world as well, in which if you're tiny, you get run over. If you stand together, you have much more power, which is one of the many reasons I disagreed with leaving the European Union. But that's an argument that's gone. If you're on your own, you have less influence and less power, and that would certainly be the case if Boris Johnson were responsible for breaking up the UK, and he's doing a very good job of going about it at the present time.
Peter Hain, thank you. Lord Peter Hain, former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and former Secretary of State for Wales, as it happens, Leader of the Commons too. An experienced parliamentarian, doesn't want to break up the union. I'd echo certainly the sentiment of what he said there. Is this down to Boris? Has Boris caused this sense that the SNP and others, Drakeford, people in Northern Ireland are sensing that this is the time? If you can't capitalise when the leader of Westminster is weak, then there's never going to be a better time.